Hello listeners, and welcome to Plugged In, the Energy News podcast from Montel, where we bring you the latest news, issues, and changes happening in the energy sector. It's been branded the future power hub of the continent, a historic chance for Europe, an escape from the fossil fuel roller coaster. We are, of course, talking about Monday's signing of the Wind Power Pact in Hamburg, where 10 European countries committed to jointly delivering 100 gigawatts of North Sea offshore wind power. It seems that Europe has stuck its finger up to Trump and the Trump administration and his loser windmill talk from Davos last week, declaring wind turbines as the winners. But if we look at the detail of what's being proposed, there's many a question that needs to be answered. How realistic is this grand, collaborative and cross-border plan? Is it financially viable? And how is it going to tackle some of the existing financial challenges to offshore wind projects? Also, how will it be organised in terms of grids, interconnectors and bidding zones? In this episode, I'll be speaking to offshore wind developer Ørsted, TenneT, the TSO for Germany and the Netherlands, and our own energy expert at Montel. We'll be discussing all these questions and much, much more. But first, I'm joined by one of our Germany editors, Andreas Lochner. A warm welcome back to the podcast, Andreas.
Yeah, hi Richard. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about the wind pact that was signed in Hamburg this week. Can you tell us exactly what was agreed and why it's significant, Andreas?
Well, there were several political agreements. The major agreement was about 100 gigawatts of offshore wind being built in the North Sea, but connected to several countries. So not only one wind farm connected to one country, but sort of a meshed grid where countries can really exchange via those wind farms. And that's obviously a very new approach when it comes to the policy scene. At least 9 years ago already, TenneT had proposed something similar, also with the scale of 100 gigawatts, by the way, an offshore island in the North Sea. And now you could say politicians have picked up the idea and come up with a mesh grid of 100 gigawatts of offshore wind farms connected to several countries. And that's something quite revolutionary because then several markets at the same time can profit from a wind farm. The big challenge will now be to see if we share the benefits, how do we share the burdens of investment?
I think, absolutely. As always, the devil is going to be in the detail there. But I think that historical perspective is very important, Andreas. I think Germany and the German Energy Minister was certainly very enthusiastic or positive. What's the general view from Germany? Do others share that or are some a bit more skeptical?
In general, the perspective was quite positive. Many welcomed the idea. Obviously, as you mentioned, the devil is in the details. So let's see how it will actually develop, how much will be built and when, and how will the agreements actually look like when it comes to burden sharing, right? But there's the political will there, and that was welcome. There were also some worries regarding the costs, because offshore wind, it's costly, and the big question is, like, will it deliver at prices per megawatt hour, so the actual electricity delivered at a price level that really helps us. And there were some doubts, like, for example, from the Regional Utility Association, VKU in Germany. They said, well, it could be actually quite expensive for us. But there were also expectations that, especially when you sort of link those wind farms to several countries, that can really benefit the whole of Europe, basically.
Exactly. That's also, that's a very positive sign there. But, in particular, Germany struggled to get bids for offshore wind tenders. Key lobby group came out this week to say the government will miss its 2030 target of 30 gigawatts. What's the issue here for Germany? And could this pact that we saw signed in Hamburg go some way to solve some of those issues?
Well, that remains to be seen, but Germany's target towards 2045 is like 70 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, and that's quite a lot. And the problem is maybe it is too much, so that the wind farms will stand in the way of others, really, so that the wind speeds will diminish because there's a shadow from one windmill to the next, one turbine to the next. So actually, maybe the targets for Germany, gigawatt-wise, have to be reduced. Some say to 50 to 60 or so, that they are not so close to each other. And obviously then, well, they expect the output to be quite the same. But obviously when you connect the wind farms from other countries as well, then there's much more potential to have a more steady supply. And so in this sense, it will help. When we talk about the short-term perspective, I think it doesn't help because obviously those projects take a longer time to build them. Offshore wind farms, they're massive investments and also require a lot of planning. And I actually haven't seen a detailed timeline on when those 100 gigawatts will be there. So that again remains to be seen.
You know, it's just a start. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of detail that needs to be ironed out. But thank you very much, Andreas.
Thank you, Richard.
So I'm pleased to introduce Ulrik Stridbæk, Head of Regulatory and Public Affairs at Ørsted. Welcome to the Plugged In podcast, Ulrik.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
So it was quite a big announcement this week on Monday, the signing of the Wind Power Pact, 100 gigawatts. Is this kind of Europe saying or responding to Trump's comments about windmills and saying actually this form of renewable power production is vital for Europe's energy security?
So the statements made yesterday by policymakers had this message between the lines for sure. Energy security, Europe taking matters in their own hands. I think we must also remember, though, that this is a culmination of a process, political, regulatory, visionary, that has now been going on for several years. And for us in Ørsted, the most positive signal that was sent yesterday was that we are, with these declarations, with these agreements, really, in our view, signaling that we have the will and the ability to take ambition into real action. It was not so much about the size and the scale of the numbers, but it was the statements about what it will take and how we will do it.
In essence, I mean, we've heard, like you say, that this has been several years coming. I mean, we've had massive, ambitious targets of 300 gigawatts offshore wind by 2050 announced before. What's new about Monday's statement?
To us, the most positive new signals here and actual commitments is, number one, that governments now realize and accept that we will have to share risks in new ways. We will have to, risks are too high for investors like us to take this on our own. That was number one. Accepting that we will need contracts for difference, for example. And number two was also to get into the weeds of the industry and realize that we have to plan better. If every country wants all their capacity to come in 2030 or 2035 or 2040, the supply chain will choke up and it will just create inflation unnecessarily and other problems in the supply chain. So risk sharing and planning, that was the real interesting new features in this agreement.
So between countries and also presumably between companies as well. Yeah.
Certainly between countries, certainly between transmission system operators. And on the back of that, also, I think we in the industry, we've stood up to this. And we have been able to agree among each other that we will then also have to deliver. We will have to commit to investments. We will have to commit to doing things better, scaling up, industrializing, standardizing, so that we can get costs down again.
But where are we at the moment, Ulrik? We're about 36 gigawatts, aren't we? I think of installed offshore wind capacity in Europe. To reach this target is a phenomenal challenge. I mean, is that target realistic?
Actually, it is, yes. The size, the scale of the supply chain, according to our analysis, is that we can build at least 10, maybe even 15 gigawatt per year if it's fully utilized. And certainly in the time frame that we are lining up here, so this is projects to be built from 2031 to 2040, yes, there is not a problem to scale up the supply chain to do this. We have the industry, our end of the industry, the developers, we have access to this capital. If risks are managed properly, and if risk and reward is balanced properly. So yes, it is realistic with these timelines and these volumes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's very reassuring, Ulrik. I think in terms of it's early days, of course, but how would this work in practice? Because the grid is organised on a national basis. Here we're looking at more collaborative, cross-border cooperation between TSOs. Would you have sort of a multinational kind of offshore bidding zone, for example, or several of those? Has that been talked about already?
All of these things have been talked about for years and have employed a lot of people like me getting into the weeds of regulation, and we think it's very fascinating. I must say, though, and it is Ørsted's view, that we do not have time to put up very, very grand revolutionary schemes that then needs to be developed and implemented in detail. We will have to solve things, also difficult things, but to us, it's important, first of all, that we get going. We are not imagining that we will set up huge new institutions, that it will take years to agree on and develop. But it does make sense if the countries that have signed this, they do, for example, talk with each other about the planning of their tenders. If the supply chains seem to be fully booked in 1 year or in a number of years, maybe you want to consider to time the tenders that you put out so that it fits the totality. So having these conversations going, that's very, very important. Also, on the transmission side, hugely complex. We know this. It is national in nature, but getting some projects going is going, in our view, to be incredibly important. We saw very advanced agreement now between Denmark and Germany on the Bornholm Energy Island. That will be a phenomenally important test case. We are seeing agreements between Germany and the UK a little bit further ahead or further out in time, but also immensely important between the Netherlands and the UK and so on and so on. So speaking about projects, getting projects going into those difficult negotiations about turning this into reality, we think that that's the way to develop the model rather than developing the ideal world first before we get going.
If it's 85% good enough, then it's probably good enough to get going. Is that the kind of concept?
Good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
These that matters are too important. We are in too much of a hurry. It is too essential for all of Europe, including non-EU Europe. So we got to get going. And also just think about the liberalization, the opening of the internal electricity market. That has also been a process. These things are too big, too complicated to figure it out perfectly up front. So even if we tried to do it, we would not succeed. We would spend a lot of time, we would waste a lot of time, and there would still be problems that we hadn't understood. So let's get going.
Yeah, so get going. And so if I understand you correctly, Ulrik, if there are any cross-border issues that they would need to be solved while this project was ongoing.
Absolutely. For example, hybrids, where you have offshore wind farms and the necessary interconnectors that we will also need, we have them joined into one asset to save money, to improve efficiency. TSOs tells us that a good part of the offshore wind development should be in such collaboration projects. And now we are taking that to the next level with the Bornholm project. By doing that, you are raising issues like bidding zones, congestion rents, pricing, who will bear the cost of the transmission, who will cover the risk of the offshore wind, what about onshore bottlenecks, what about price zones in countries. We talk a lot about Germany in that regard, and so on and so on and so on. There are so many issues. And to be able to agree between Denmark and Germany, they have to actually dig into this. I do not think that they will come out of that room with a perfect model, but they will for sure be forced to address some of those problems.
And who will regulate it or oversee it? Is it the Commission? Is it going to be ESA? Is it going to be a selection of national regulators to deal with these issues of congestion management, of bidding zones, of pricing, of congestion rents, etc., which sometimes have been sticking points between TSOs of one country versus another. So how will that be overseen, Ulrik, do you see now?
The only thing I can say for sure about that right now is that we have the institutions that we have. So it will be national regulators. I am sure ESA will have their views for sure. And so will the European Commission. In our regard, and the way things have unfolded, also with the grids package and a long journey from the European Commission side, the European Commission, they at least have people that are sitting and thinking about this very, very carefully. Because in our view, what we do know is that a hybrid asset, it is not an interconnector, it is not an offshore wind farm, it's a joint asset. It's put together. And the way we have heard this addressed until now by regulators, to be honest, is a little bit backward looking, taking the point of departure of the things that we know, the regulation put in place through the market directives, through the market regulations. And in our view, that's simply not enough. These hybrids were not thought of when we conceived the internal energy market. And I think the European Commission, they have at least opened that box and have recognized this and are starting to think about these things in a serious way. But answers are difficult.
Of course, and it requires a total change in the mindset. You can't look back at what's happened in the past. You need to look forward at what is the market design that we want for this to succeed, absolutely, and to utilize that offshore wind. I have a couple more questions, Rick. I realize, I think, what does this mean? I know your company's been in the news a lot in recent months, especially with the US and etc. But what does this kind of collaborative agreement mean for Ørsted?
First of all, it is recognizing 2 lines under it in bold that Europe will not be able to do what it wants to do in terms of energy security, in terms of decarbonization, saving the climate without offshore wind at a very large scale. That is, of course, very important for a company like mine, who is the world leader and believes in this industry and believes in exactly that we can't do without offshore wind. So on a high level, that is the most important. Going a little bit more in detail, zooming in, the offshore wind sector has been in trouble. It's been very, very difficult. Part of this is inflicted by the broad inflation issues we had after COVID. Part of it is probably also self-inflicted with the way the supply chain, us on the developer side, we have been driving this. But a part of it is also the way governments have been thinking about offshore wind. It was a mistake, in our view, to think about offshore wind resources as a source of blunt income. It's just a misconception. The main value of offshore wind is not the income, direct income that you can sweat out of it as a government, as a Ministry of Finance. The main added value is, of course, through the electricity price, the electricity production delivered to our citizens, our industries. And this is what was, I think, cemented in Hamburg on Monday. This is, in our view, the way the British government has acted all along. They have also made their mistakes. They have also had their problems. But realizing that, for example, we will need offshore wind to fuel a massive increase in electricity demand. And electricity demand with electrification, with decarbonization, that is hugely political. It's politically driven. So that fundamental risk, it is a political risk that we cannot, if you let us on the developer side manage that risk, we will invest too little and too late. So for Ørsted, these high-level realizations and the willingness to go about risk sharing in a different way, that is quite fundamental for us.
Ulrik, thanks very much for being a guest on the Plugged In podcast.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
So, will the success or failure of this new agreement be at the hands of grid operators, TSOs, the industry, and governments? So, I'm pleased to be joined now by Joanna Sternberg from Dutch TSO, Dutch and German TSO, I should say, TenneT. A warm welcome to you, Joanna.
Thank you very much.
And Hubert Put, analyst from Montel. A warm welcome to you, Hubert.
Thank you very much, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
So, if I start with you, Joanna, what are the key takeaways in your view of Monday's agreement?
The summit itself came at the right time. So it was Trump, there was a Davos the week before, which sort of like gave a devastating picture in terms of how is the Europe looking like, how they look at Europe, so and how trustworthy actually the US is as a partner when it comes to energy reliance. So it really showed we need to be more independent from third countries. So what do we do here? So really, so this atmosphere of we need to create the North Sea as Europe's powerhouse. So having the ability of, serving up to 40% of Europe's whole electricity demand by having this 300 gigawatts installed of wind capacity in the North Sea was sort of like, if you felt it everywhere. So it really said, unite as Europe. That is what I would say is the common. It's the overall feeling that you had in this room. This pact that was signed, this North Sea Wind Power Pact, as just mentioned, between the governments, the TSOs, and also the wind industries, really nailed down like how do we get there. So from a TSO perspective, it is really about this 100 gigawatt that was set up, which is they call it cooperation projects, which is 100 gigawatts of hybrid interconnectors. So connecting actually a wind farm to two different countries. So I think a prominent example of this is a line link, which connects a Dutch wind farm to the Dutch shore, but also to the UK shore. And also, it's important to say probably that this 100 gigawatt also includes cross-border radials, where you have, for instance, a Danish wind farm that is only being connected to another country, so not to the home market, for instance, just to the German shore instead of the Danish shore. So that's what we are looking into as TSOs to deliver those concrete projects in order to achieve those 100 gigawatts.
Fantastic, John. I think I'd like to return to some of those issues there, because that hasn't always been such plain sailing in Europe in terms of this sort of a hybrid and these kind of interconnectors. But Hubert, what's your view here on Monday's pact that was signed? What do you make of it?
Well, definitely this is a step in the right direction, I would say. But this is only an announcement. So this is a very powerful one, I would say, one that really resonates with the strategy, with something that Europe wants to achieve in the longer term. Nevertheless, as the head of the National Energy Agency, so Fatih Birol, said, parole, so words, but we believe in data. So let's see what the future brings. But, when it comes to current situation, I observe the financial markets, and I must say that the reaction from the financial markets, from the investors, is very positive. Vestas and Orsted, so the companies that were, maybe not in dire straits, but they were, I would say, they had some negative views given the fact of their investment in wind energy over the recent years. You say their stocks went up by 4%, so each of the companies 4%. For Orsted, it's the highest since the mid-September last year. And when it comes to RWE, so the biggest winner of the recent offshore wind auctions in the UK, over 2% up, and the Wind Energy Exchange Traded Fund overall 2% up as well. So I would say the market currently believes that this is something that not only is a strategy words something intangible, but something that can fuel the transition and the offshore wind industry to make it better positioned in the near future.
And make it more independent from third parties, as Joanna said as well, to drive that forward for the European energy independence, and increase security of supply. That's a very good point. But we at Montel, we don't really focus on share prices of companies, but we're very much into the price of electricity. We haven't seen obviously any reaction. It's far too far in the future to see that yet. But Joanna, if I can come back to you and ask you, so this 100 gigawatt figure, why 100 gigawatts? And is that really realistic?
Yeah, let's see. Why 100 gigawatt? I think there are various numbers which can be taken in terms of like how much is really needed. I know there are other different numbers, like for instance, the offshore network development plan, which was announced in 24. Yeah, exactly 24. The last one actually talked about they looked into also 300 gigawatt, but produced less necessity. So it was I think about 45%. 45 gigawatts, sorry for that they have said earlier. So is 100 really realistic? I find it difficult to give a clear answer. I mean, we are standing behind that. So we're going for that. But we also see a slowdown when it comes to wind offshore capacity and tendering in other countries. We know the Netherlands have dropped their numbers, how much capacity is needed in 2040 then. So not having 50 gigawatt anymore, but rather 30 to 40 gigawatt. We see that also for Germany. So that's also realism is also from a TSO perspective is necessary here. So that's also what we are looking for. And that's something that I might want to stress here, this 100 gigawatt. I'm not sure whether you've seen it. Norway said they're not part of those 100 gigawatt. It was in the Norwegian press saying like, we are not supporting this 100 gigawatt because they are afraid of higher electricity prices due to more interconnection to Europe. So that is clear. But as such, I would say, realism is key. And what you just said, Hubert, is how can we actually achieve it? And I think this pact, needs to be read together with this joint declaration of intent between those 5 countries. So Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, and Denmark, about having really concrete projects, hybrid projects, about 20 gigawatt to be established at the beginning of the 2030s.
That's crucial. And you made it very clear that we need to move away from words towards action, Hubert. And how does that work in practice? I mean, we've seen, the offshore wind industry has been really struggling over the last 2 or 3 years, and not just because of what's happening across the Atlantic, but more to do with the post-COVID inflation, the supply chain issues. So how can we transform that number, the words, into action, Hubert? What's required?
Well, I think that everybody would like to know that, to be fair. And
it is a very tricky question. It's a $100 question, $100 billion
$100 billion, more like $100 billion question, given the fact that the cost, it would be like 200 billion euros if all of those 100 gigawatts were will come to fruition. But this is, let me say, far into the future. But yeah, what we saw recently, what we saw from 2024 were basically the failed auctions. Denmark, Germany, France, it was like a partial success. Netherlands, no bids. However, there is a ray of sunshine in this pouring rain, I would say. So it's not raining cats and dogs anymore in this context. For example, I think the Ireland was the first one to actually step, and there was granted 900 megawatts of capacity there. Also, it's not a part of the North Sea, obviously, but this is some other emerging markets, which is Poland, 3.4 gigawatts for 3 projects. It's obviously more pricey because it's emerging market compared to Denmark, UK, or Germany, where the prices are lower for these projects. I mean, strike prices, obviously. And right now, a great success, 8.4 gigawatts in the UK. So we need those bold moves. We still need those, I would say, small yet remarkable successes. And my understanding of the current situation and what the future might bring is that we might need to do one step back when it comes to support schemes. So all of those 3 countries, Ireland, Poland, UK, CFD schemes are there. When it comes to other countries like Germany, for example, there was a negative bidding scheme there. So maybe we might need to actually make this one step back in order to move 2 steps forward to achieve these goals and to then make offshore wind, let me say, more mature again in this context. I would say so. However, it will be a step back because it will be a major, I would say, contribution from the state. So therefore, we need to do this in order to reaccelerate the rollout, and this is what I think needs to be done.
So contracts of difference for those listeners who aren't aware of CFDs. But Joanna, what's your view here? Yeah, is this a way we can really accelerate it, push it forward? What needs to happen?
No, definitely. I totally agree with Hubert here. And I mean, also speaking for the Netherlands, they have just, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, announced that there will also be a tender for the first time again, not with negative bids, but with subsidies. Not that's just for 1 gigawatt, not for 2 as they have foreseen earlier. And that will be launched in, I think it will start the tender in 26. But CFD is the way to go. And also, according to European legislation, as of 27, CFD is the new normal. So you don't have any other choice. It must be a CFD. So that's absolutely something that is necessary for that gives, and that's a kick for the kickoff for the wind industry as such. But I mean, not to forget the demand side here. Because I mean, if there isn't industrial demand, if we don't get the demand on the road together with the wind offshore developing side here, we don't need any wind parks. We don't need any interconnections if we don't have any customers. So also that needs to be streamlined and needs to be pushed forward from the European side, talking about but also from national ministries here, or from national governments, because you see a competition. Some countries already give subsidies, others don't. You have a rat race.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Joanna. And I think, we're seeing talk of a massive boost in electricity from AI centers, AI in particular. But by the time this 100 gigawatts comes online, it might be far too late. I mean, you won't be able to supply these centers. So that's a very important point. But I want to also turn to a little bit about market design. I mean, what's being proposed here is massively ambitious. It's the collaborative and cross-border issues between TSOs, the industry, between governments. That hasn't always been so successful in the past. And you mentioned Norway and the opposition to interconnectors. That's very strong. So how do you to form a market design concept that actually will work? Do you do it as you go along, or do you come with a blueprint first? How does that work, Joanna?
Well, I'll probably start with giving a practical example, because, I mean, if we're talking about those hybrid offshore interconnectors, they need a separate offshore bidding zone. So they will not be connected to a bidding zone onshore. So there will be a separate one. And there are, and that's what we're also admitting as TSOs here, there are risks for offshore wind developers for building those wind parks, and that need to be mitigated. It also needs to be mitigated in the tenders that are upcoming, so the governments know about that. It's not that easy. There aren't that many customers coming in for this offshore bidding zone. What we do or have done in the Netherlands is actually we have proposed a blueprint for offshore bidding zones as the national TSO, and via the Dutch government, so via the ministry, we actually went into stakeholder dialogue with the offshore wind developer, potential offshore wind developers in the Netherlands, such as Ørsted, RWE, BPG, and Next, to discuss their issues that they're looking into and how can we mitigate those. And that is something that it needs to be done at a more international level if there are more offshore biddings or hybrid interconnectors are being built, those 100 being foreseen, or 20 in total until the first beginning of 2030s.
So these are huge challenges, are they not, Hubert? Because as well, I think national governments are elected by their own national people, of course, by their own citizens, and if they feel that the neighbours are getting all the benefits, they're going to get punished for it. So are there a lot of square pegs and round holes, or how do you square that argument, Hubert?
Well, so first of all, Joanna made a very good argument about the demand side. So obviously, we are investing a lot in renewable energy sources, but we need to remind ourselves that there is this other side. Because obviously, if we build a lot of renewables and there will be no demand, this is a pathway to the negative prices. Negative prices soared across Europe in 2025 immensely. And I'm not talking only about mature markets, Netherlands, Belgium, but also about emerging ones like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Hungary, and so on and so forth. So therefore, there is this additional cost of building the the structure on the demand side. And what I want to underline here is that basically the active ones here will win. So the ones that actually will invest in the battery storage systems, for example, they will utilize the downward price spikes, and they will discharge during the times when the system is very short. And obviously, a lot of these things are connected to energy management systems. So there needs to be participation from the entire economy. I'm talking industrials, I'm talking residentials, I'm talking all the other players on the energy market, in order to alleviate the potential to for wholesale prices case. But when it comes to offshore wind, one more thing, well, it is a technology with actually, according to IEA, the highest LCOE among the solar PV and onshore wind, 2 times more for offshore wind. And therefore, I think it's also the matter of the social agreement to not build more or a lot more renewables next to households. So it's really, I would say, to some extent, an NIMBY effect. You don't want to have a lot of onshore wind turbines kind of next to your backyard. There is a price to pay.
But again, as well, I think when coming back to the customers, if you provide that sort of low prices to those countries in the 5 that won't be mentioned, so Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, the UK, and Denmark, then everyone else will want to join in, I'm sure, but want to join that pact and that agreement. I think that's absolutely crucial, and it remains to see how the impact that will have on wholesale prices. Obviously, it'd still be very choppy and dependent on weather, and not least, of course, wind. Now, but in terms of sort of a technical standpoint, Joanna, how will TSOs in this sort of common offshore bidding zone be able to protect against extreme weather, cyber security, outages, etc.? So, I think the cyber security and the risk of attack is certainly very central in people's minds. And how can you protect this kind of infrastructure from those kind of dangers?
Yeah. No, it's always a question. How much can I tell you about security threats? What can I share in public?
You could tell me, but then you might have to kill me. Yes.
Exactly. That's next one. Exactly. That's another step I can take. Absolutely. No. Of course, we're taking those into consideration already when planning the hybrid interconnector or interconnectors as such. I mean, it's really about security by design. So if we're doing this transformator platform, which is on for 2 gigawatt in this case, this has already been aligned with our supplier. So with Hitachi, Siemens, all we are working with. That's one thing. The second thing is probably also when it comes to the cables, the new ones are being buried in the ground. So they're not such as in contrast for gas infrastructure, they're not lying on the seabed, but they're actually being buried 7 meters underground. So they cannot be sabotaged, being turned out that easily. And of course, we are also working together with coastal guards here. And I mean, NATO was present for the first time at the North Sea Summit, showing the importance of security. And I think as the North Sea, we can have a look as a best practice with smaller scale at the Baltic Sea. What have they achieved there to secure our civil and critical infrastructure, and what can we actually take up for the North Sea and duplicate here?
I mean, the very important points. Maybe Hubert wants to say something about the experience in the Baltics, but just before you do, Hubert, I'd like to ask you, will this 100 gigawatts, a huge amount of electricity potentially, will it bring prices down for industry and consumers?
So, Richard, basically all will depend on the demand side response, actually. And I mean demand side response in the context of how much of this electricity can be stored. What are the companies that are planning on investing in, for example, energy storage in demand side response contribution to the market, and as well in the energy security, but I want to touch upon this a bit later. So the wholesale prices will be lowered, most probably. However, we will experience most probably a lot of price spikes, especially during the morning and during the evening peak. However, when it comes to offshore wind, this will actually bring some alleviation the evening peak, given the fact of the profile generation of the wind assets. However, there is a risk that due to massive investment in the critical infrastructure, from technical point of view, so for example, high voltage, and as well the energy security measures, well, this will take its toll this way or another in this particular tax or another. I can give an example of, for example, Sweden, which recently, due to cyber and physical security risks, it led to cancellation of 13 projects there. So as well, what Joanna mentioned about lessons learned from the Baltic Sea countries, there's a lot to learn both ways, I would say, in this case.
We've got so much to talk about. I could talk here for hours, but we have to bring it to a close now. So suffice to say, Joanna, thank you very much for being a guest on the Plugged In podcast, and you, Hubert, as well. So we hope to have you back on soon where we can discuss these issues again and see how the developments have proceeded. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And to you listeners, thanks for listening to this episode of Plugged In. If you enjoyed this discussion, please like, rate, and follow to make sure you get the latest podcast episodes as soon as we release them every Thursday. We'd also love to read your reviews of the podcast. It helps us to keep up to date with what you, our listeners, think of the podcast and what content you want to receive more of. Finally, you can head to montelnews.com for more news and analysis from our team of journalists across Europe and beyond. See you next time.